Good day, everyone. In this micro lecture, we're going to be revisiting supply chain strategy, lean and agile, and exploring in a little bit more detail what we mean by the concepts of lean and agile and how they can be applied within the context of supply chain management in this module. So, as you would have been reading through the different concepts, the different articles, and working through the quizzes, you would have started to unpack some of the concepts in a bit more detail. In this micro lecture, I will just briefly take you through the dynamics of the lean and agile designs, looking at both the merits and the value adds within the supply chain strategy as a whole. The suitability of each strategy is dependent on a number of different variables that, as supply chain managers, you would have to consider. Now, if we track the evolution of various production strategies, we can trace it all the way back to mass production of Henry Ford's Model T, right from the early 20th century, right down to lean production developed by Toyota post World War II, right down to the concept of the term supply chain, mass customization, servitization, and so on. Production strategies have evolved significantly over the last few decades, and of course, during the turn up to the turn of the century, production strategies will continue to evolve. And as customer expectations become more diverse, become more demanding, there's greater emphasis placed on customizing orders, become order winners becoming order qualifiers, the adoption of cloud-based and 3D manufacturing, and of course the growth in servitization, where customers are looking for solutions and not just products. So, when it came to production, early production was focused on craft production. Fast forward to the early 20th century and now the 21st century, it went from mass production to mass customization. Companies are not competing just on speed, but they're competing on a host of different dimensions. Speed is a minimum expectation. These days, it's about customization. How can you speak directly to what customers expect from you? And that brings us to lean production. As you would have been reading through your textbook, lean production and its origins can be traced right back to TPS, or the Toyota Production System, where in a post World War II world, Toyota needed to survive. The Japanese needed to rebuild. And as a result, they could not afford to waste any factors of production. And the Toyota production system was born out of this. It placed an emphasis on quick turnovers, eliminating wastes, maintaining low levels of inventory, and achieving total quality management, amongst others. They adopted the principles of Kaizen, total quality management, and continuous improvement to develop a system that these days has become synonymous with quality and lean inventory management. While many production systems were push based, Toyota worked on a system that was pull based. They worked on a system that minimized inventory, kept inventory to a minimum, and replenished it only as it was used, and eliminate waste. That's what the TPS sought to do. It looked at waste as something so evil that the production system had to eliminate it, not just minimize it. And Ono, who worked for Toyota at the time, Taichi Ono, adopted these seven wastes into his principles, where he looked at overproduction, waiting, transportation, inappropriate processing, amongst others, including unnecessary inventory and motion, as well as defects. The idea behind this was that if you focus on eliminating these seven wastes, you increase the efficiency and optimize the processing capability of your supply chain. You're not wasting time on these processes that add very little value, if not just take away from the process itself. But instead, you eliminate these wastes and focus on what adds value for your supply chain and, of course, for your customer. A key aspect of lean is making sure that value is added at each stage of the process. If a process or a part of the process or a stage in the process is not adding value, it should be eliminated. It is not of any use. And in recent years, underutilization of resources has been added to the list of wastes. Because if you've got resources that you're not using to their full capability, it is a wastage, right? So, the essence of lean is summarized in five key principles in your textbook. It's about identifying, firstly, how customers view value creation. Where do they think or perceive values created from? It's about mapping your value stream, your entire process that creates customer value. It's about ensuring that all steps in the process are flowing efficiently. It's about having a pull based system. In other words, you need to work off of real demand. Don't base it off a forecast, which in essence is an educated guess. And when you are addressing problems, use a root cause approach. In other words, look for the cause of the problem and address it, not a symptom of the problem, because then you'll have a lasting solution that will actually address the problem itself. Those are the key principles of lean management. Womack and Jones in 1991 developed their own principles of lean consumption, which revolved around the customer's problem being solved completely, providing the customers with what they want, not wasting their time, and about aggregating solutions and creating solutions that make the customer's life overall a lot more easier. For, in other words, bundling services with products, which has become the absolute norm in the supply chain sector. So, when it comes to lean production, we find that there are, of course, diminishing returns. Firm performance tends to peak at a certain point in time when you have optimal leanness, and the more lean you become, the more your performance will start to dip. So, of course, it speaks to the need to revitalize your products, revisit your production processes, and look at whether what you're doing is actually adding value or not. And that brings us to agile supply chains and mass customization. So, managing supply chains effectively, as we've seen, is a complex undertaking. We've got to deal with expanding product varieties, shortening product life cycles, globalization, risk events, the risk of disruption, natural disasters, advancements in technology. All of these have created very volatile environments. The lean supply chain and agile supply chains were developed in response to different situations. In this case, the agile supply chain attempted to mitigate such volatility. The concept itself was created at Cranfield University by Professor Martin Christopher, and the agile supply chain was designed to cope and manage and mitigate volatility, risk, uncertainty, and vulnerability in a supply chain. A key characteristic here is that the agile supply chain actually acts as a demand chain. So it's all movement that happens upstream in the supply chain results from customer demand, not a forecast, not a guess. And that brings me to the end of this micro lecture. As we've seen, the agile supply chain itself is a massive undertaking. And as you work through the remainder of this week's lessons and material, you'll have a better appreciation of what goes into managing an agile supply chain. Thank you.